There is nothing quite like a wound from our mothers that can hold us back from living the lives we're meant to live. I know that the challenge for so many of us is that whatever story we've come from, that is the only story we know. And it has shaped our beliefs, our personality traits, our relationship dynamics, how we see ourselves, how we show up in the world. It really is about the attachment wounds we experience, the attachment trauma at the hands of what is often the mothering figure, regardless of who that person is. Mothers, I truly believe, as I've said, I think have the hardest, most demanding job in the world. Whoever that person is, whoever is the primary caretaker, and usually in every family, historically, there's one person that is doing a bit more, whether it's because of the time they have or whatever, but at the core, I do believe we are wired to be attached, just like we are with an umbilical cord to a mother. And we know about the trauma of adoption. Like, there's a lot of complicated factors. It's not that just you can just swap in and out human beings sometimes, that there's a sort of an alchemy happening as we're, becoming mothers and moving through the world, and who becomes a mother, who doesn't, and there's sort of a magic to all of it and a pain to all of it. So what I'd like to do is share just with you what the research says for many of us, how these attachment mother trauma wounds often affect our lives, to truly validate your story, and then just talk a little bit about what I see as the number of wounds that are in need of healing to help work on our mother wounds, if that makes sense. So if we're talking about who creates mother wounds, we really are talking about a wide spectrum of people. On the one end, obviously we have, or actually throughout the whole spectrum, potentially intergenerational trauma, parents who are traumatized in parenting, which is most of us in some form, but depending upon the lack of awareness or awareness, the motivation to change, things like that, that can have a real impact. But we have things like emotional immaturity, just certain behaviors that were just sort of not well developed in a parent. Along the spectrum, we have parents who struggle with disorders like narcissism and or borderline personality, other types of just general depression, anxiety, mental health wounds, whatever it is, trauma. But the bottom line is that it's so important to not judge and shame those who struggle. But the problem is, as children, it is all we know. We do not know, for example, that our mother or father is struggling or a parent with some disorder. And so we're going to give them some leeway and space when it's happening. We might grow into understanding that in our younger, maybe even our teen years. We might, as adults, try to say, hey, I get it. But the problem is there's the compassion for now, for the humanness of your parent, which we all realize we're all just broken humans trying to figure it out. Some of us more broken than others. But when we are developing our sense of self, that is happening in this space where we don't have the knowledge and tools or even brain capacity and development to understand that, for example, traumatized parents might traumatize us. And so I think that's where it gets difficult, and where I've seen the wounds stay even the most difficult in terms of healing, being unhealed, is when a child becomes more of an adult and understands that their parent is a complicated, complex human, and tries to shift the relationship. If the parent is not willing to own their behavior, apologize, make room for change, acknowledge and validate the wounds, even though it's really hard to hear that we might make mistakes, it leaves no room for that relationship to develop. And I think that is why often people end up going no contact, because in my experience, the person who went no contact tried often for years to try to get some kind of repair, to set a boundary or boundaries, to change the relationship, and it just doesn't. And when we're talking about parents with certain types of untreated, undiagnosed disorders, like a trauma personality in some massive way, something like borderline or narcissism, which we do know by and large are often caused through trauma, but we also know there are genetics and biology pieces involved. It's complicated, and it's not about saying, well, you have this disorder and so that's bad. It's just that as a result of where you struggled, I find there's a collection of wounds. And so that to me is really true when we talk, for example, about narcissistic parents. Let's presume for a second there's just a straight disorder versus parents who have more emotional, relational dysregulation, which really is often the heart of a borderline example, for a borderline parent, for example. The problem with the narcissistic parent, as I've talked about in so many videos, is that you almost never feel any kind of scene or mirroring. Love is conditional, they're a victim. Maybe you feel some good love when you're doing what they want, but you don't really get that. And I think the parents who are immature or who have other disorders like BPD, they often can give you what I've talked about, good love and bad love, where they're not always, conditional. They can be very loving, very helpful, very engaging. It's just that what will follow will always be the other side of the coin, which is the unsafe, the not good love, the bad love. And that, I think, as I said, and I'll keep saying it, is just, it's really confusing, because if you never get anything good from them, then it's like, well, I'm not really losing anything. But if you go no contact because of the hurtful, harmful behavior, but you still had good experiences at times, it's even harder to separate that and just stay apart from it. So that being said, let's talk about what happens to us. So we certainly have an increased risk, we're talking about significant mother wounds, for lifetime chronic mental and physical health issues. Often a deep sense of toxic shame and self-blame and worthiness at the core for really any of those, especially if the love was generally emotionally unsafe, unpredictable, or highly conditional. We often find ourselves in repeated toxic pattern relationships, so deeply trying to finally get it right as that little child. This time I'm going to get the partner, AKA the mommy daddy I long for. I'm going to be seen. Okay, I have cat hair everywhere. I always have cat hair, thanks to my sweet Coco, who's napping on my desk right now. But we often end up repeating those relationships, which unfortunately reinforce our often underlying core wounds and beliefs that, if mommy, daddy, parent wasn't safe, then no love can be safe. Or if I wasn't worthy in that relationship, I will find a partner who reinforces I'm not worthy in this relationship. We can often feel deeply empty inside and then busy ourselves with workaholism, addiction, substances, numbing, repeated relationships, just this longing to feel whole inside, but often vacant and empty. No matter what we do, we can have the highest achieving self. That's that perfectionistic part that often forms in response to try to getting in front of being that, inner outer critic. Like, okay, if you're perfect, then you don't have to feel the pain of not being good enough. But we all know that perfection is an illusion. We can have control issues and significant trust issues, like I was saying, fundamentally in human beings and partners. And the more our love is on the risk, on the line, the more we're scanning for threat or rejection or abandonment. We can have difficult issues around boundary setting, implementing them, holding them, setting them, even respecting them ourselves if we never had that experience. A deep sense of loneliness and isolation and fear inside, and then as a result often self-isolate to deal with that pain. Difficulty with our maturation and development. And by the way, these are from the course I have on having narcissistic and or borderline parents. And this is just really talking about what often happens to us. And just really quickly, as another example, we know from the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that what happens to us in childhood has a profound impact on our adult lives as much as it does our childhoods, right? So that's why I always say we don't always see the outcome in childhood. We look like we're fine and resilient, but we're actually really struggling as adults. So what needs to happen to heal the mother wound? That to me is really the core of the 3 courses I've created in terms of identifying parent wounds. Because there's a free course probably on identifying what may have happened to you and what that may have been about. And then I have a course on reparenting yourself and the inner child, and a course, like I said, on really, it's a pretty extensive course on everything I know from my own personal and professional experience in working with truly hundreds of people who've had these kind of childhoods. And what I know to be true and what I've done are the things I want to share with you now. So when we talk about the core dynamics of wounds, just really quickly, I'm talking about what we're trying to heal are often our core CPTSD symptoms, our complex trauma symptoms, and our attachment wounds. And so to start working on those things, we want to work on healing the inner child and doing reparenting work. So not just how we talk to ourselves, but visualizations, boundary setting, as I always say, setting up your life in a way that says, I matter. So it's complicated in that regard. It's not so simple as just saying, well, just love yourself more, right? You see all these like little platitudes about just love yourself and you be your first champion. And it's like, yeah, that's great. But deep inside, I don't believe I'm worth that. And so how am I just going to tell myself that? So little by little, step by step, you work on talking to yourself with more compassion, setting up your life in a way that says, you know what, you can't treat me that way. Or yes, I will come to this thing, but no, I'm not going to go to that one. Or I'm going to stop feeling bad about my sensory issues and how I hate, networking and socializing. And I'm going to start, for example, making videos here so I can grow my practice that way. Whatever it is, it's like in some ways you stop beating your head against the wall of being someone that you're never going to be, while also lovingly challenging yourself to grow and heal in some places. I like to use a lot of guided meditation work as it replies, or meditations, yoga, exercise, like cardio, all the things that help you regulate your nervous system. The nervous system regulation difficulties are often at the heart of these wounds. Because if you think about the fact that if you're a baby and you're born and your parent, let's say the minute you come out of the womb, they have an anxious attachment system, let's say, for example, or they are narcissistic with an avoidant pattern. And that avoidance means that when you cry, they see it as too much. So they leave you alone to cry for hours in your room. They only reinforce you when you're doing the thing they want and being the good little child or being their best friend. Your nervous system learns in order to meet mommy's nervous system or parent nervous system and their attachment strategies, we have to interact in a certain way. Like under these conditions, I'm most likely to get my needs met. So whatever your nervous system patterns are, you want to understand that. What is your go-to? For me, it's fight or flight. It's hypervigilance. For others, it might be more collapse, frozen, shut down. It's also been for me at times fawning as a child, being a compulsive caretaker, right? That whole outside-in orientator where we're so good at meeting others' needs that we get rewarded by doing that. And we also deprive our own wounds and self by doing that. So understanding your nervous system and then using tools, like I said, that help regulate the body. Polyvagal theory, nervous system regulation. The next one is understanding the different relational parts of yourself. And in my course, I have a graphic from Terry Reel's work on the inner child and how certain, and I won't go into it here, but basically how it's like which part of me is responding. In his idea, there's a very younger wounded child and then an older, more protective child. And that's the child we're often interfacing with inside. I've used the ideal parent figure imagery exercise. There's a couple videos on that here you might check out on the website on YouTube. Learning how to manage your emotional flashbacks. This goes back to your trauma responses, understanding your trauma response go-tos, understanding your nervous system go-tos, like what happens for me, what are the triggers, and learning how to identify in your body and your mind and relationships when that's happening without shame, but with love and with also doing things. Understanding your truly core beliefs and negative cognitions. I often ask people to do in my attachment program a relational autopsy. It's like, let's look at how you've showed up in relationships. Let's look at the patterns. Let's look at your partners. Let's look at your caregivers, parenting. How did you learn to develop this set of tools as a response of your parent? So I like to do work on understanding in the course too. There's one, but you can also Google this anywhere, the different parenting styles of the different attachment styles. And I truly believe that we have a main style, but we can like lean into other styles. So having, some flexibility there and understanding that each person might trigger different parts of us. Understanding how to, journal, to do maybe self-awareness work, identity work, learning to self-reflect, which is why journaling can be helpful. Learning how to challenge your beliefs and your goals, to establish goals in relationships, to understand that what you're trying to repair isn't so much that the mother that hurt you, but you're trying to repair the versions of you, the armor you had to create to exist in that childhood. And how you're often, even though you know you're no longer in childhood, you've set up your life in a way as a result of these wounds that makes you believe that these wounds are still coming at any minute. And you might very easily have found partners that do recreate those wounds, like I said. And now you're waking up and going, I don't like how that feels anymore. I don't want that for myself. So it really is about mind, body, kind of inner child, inner parenting, nervous system. I believe the trauma responses, the generational trauma, and then the active relationships today. And that's the last thing, is if you have a mother-parent wound, and I know I say it in a bunch of videos, but you have to deal also with the relationships in front of you. The original source of the wound, the mothering dynamic or parent dynamic, and how those are replicating. And if you're a parent yourself or want to be, how those triggers might show up, or the extreme opposite, I don't want to be this, so I'm over here, and trying to find balance in all of those things. So to me, those are, and I'll show you here, those are like what I call the core self interventions. In my course, I go into a lot more than that, but all these things you can Google and find great articles and links and podcasts and videos, but whatever it is, it does take, I believe, oftentimes different types of trauma therapies, books, podcasts, like I'm saying, videos, courses, group therapy. Like it does take you leaning into your awareness and pain and developing new ways of loving yourself and using tools and access so that you don't live your life in response to the mother wound, that you live your life in spite of it, in a way that says, yeah, I had this experience, but I can still live a life with beautiful relationships and love and self-love and compassion for the parts of me that had to go through that. So that's it for today. I hope this series was helpful this week. I have no idea what I'm going to do for next week. I think I'm going to post videos Monday through Friday right now and try to give myself a break on the weekend, because otherwise I'm editing and trying to respond and not feeling like I'm doing a good job with that sometimes. But I thank you so much for being here. Please stay safe and well. And I would encourage you down below, if you want to share today, just as in terms of community sharing, what is one thing you are going to start to work on today to try to begin to heal and repair, not perfectly, but to begin to sew up that hole a bit from the mother wound? What is something that you are going to publicly say if you want to, or you can maybe just, text it to yourself to hold yourself accountable, like a loving parent would say, hey, how are you doing working on that? How can I support you? And maybe that will also spawn some new conversations for series ideas here too. So thank you so much for being here. Stay safe and well, please. And I will see you next week. Take care. Bye.